Good morning.
Good morning.
It is 10 o'clock, and so I want to welcome all of you that are viewing us on Zoom and or Facebook Live, and thank you for joining us for the second community dialogue, community discussion on race, social injustice, equality, equity, inclusion, intersectionality, on and on and on. And I'm so excited today to have this panel with us. And so I'm just going to kick it off real quick with an introduction of Kina Cesar. She is with Ameris Bank, and she's also one of our board members. And so Kina reached out to me when I announced the book and said that she was reading it and was really excited to have the conversation. And so I've tapped her as our moderator, and she will introduce our panelists, and we'll start the questions and discussion from there. So Kina, take it away.
Thank you, Joe. First, before I get started, I just want to say thank you to all the panelists. And Joe, thanks to you and the Chamber, all that you guys are doing to not only help mitigate us through this pandemic, but to have conversations like this. I'm so full of gratitude to be able to do it. So good morning, everyone. And at this time, I just want to take just a small time to introduce our panelists. We have Dr. Demafine Thomas, and we have Dr. Ansley Booker, and we also have Anita Hensu. And we would like for you all to just give us a little bit about, little information about yourselves, introduce yourselves. Just here, we'll start with Dr. Thomas.
Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be part of this discussion. Just a little bit about me. I mentioned to some of the participants already that I'm originally from Mali, West Africa, and have been in the States since I was a little girl. And so I feel like I'm an African mixed with peach, so a Georgia peach. I am rather new to Henry County in terms of as a business owner. I own Center for Stress Management and Psychological Services, which is an outpatient behavioral health resource. And my training is psychology. I'm a psychologist, completely trained in Georgia. So all Georgia universities, my PhD is from Georgia State. And again, just so honored to be a part of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Dr. Booker.
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Ansley Booker. I am a native of Edenton, Georgia, and I'm just so happy to be here today. My background is in STEM and curriculum development, but I also serve as the Director for Diversity and Inclusion at Mercer University, and we actually have a regional academic center in Henry County. So again, thank you so very much. My PhD is in higher education leadership from Mercer University.
And welcome, Dr. Booker. Thank you. Anita?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me on the panel. It's an honor to join all of you. I own a small group of restaurants in Henry County called Gezzo's West Coast Burritos. We've been around for about 17 years now. We have 2 locations, and I own a barbecue restaurant in Atlanta called Sweet Auburn Barbecue. We have 2 locations, and as well as a restaurant called Lazy Betty in Atlanta. I have about 100 employees of every race, ethnicity, sex, gender, sexuality you could think of as part of my company. So, diversity and inclusion is super important to me as a minority myself. My parents were immigrants to the States, and so they had to really kind of claw a piece of their own paradise here too. And, diversity and kind of being picked on as a kid for the color of my skin and my race in Henry County, 40 years ago, I am 40, was not the same as it is today. So, the climate's changed a lot, and I think it's always important to talk about it today as much as it was 40 years ago.
Thank you. I hope that those that are watching us on Zoom or Facebook can see the diversity of the panel that we have, but also just the strengths that each of you is bringing to the conversation today. So I cannot thank you again enough for your agreeing to participate in this conversation. I'm going to kick it off with one question that I have that is always in the back of my head whenever I start talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then I'm going to turn it back to Kina. But for for many of us, the fear of making a mistake while trying to have the conversation about race is significant, and it often scares us from having those conversations. And I know that there is you have to have a discomfort involved in having conversations about social injustices and equity and that. But sometimes the backlash happens unintentionally, and so, on one hand, you start off with good intentions, but then all of a sudden it blows up and you don't know where to go. So what is it that we can do, as a diverse community representing all the different races, genders, sexual identities, religious beliefs, all of that? What can we do to make those first steps work? And if anybody, anybody can start off with an answer or a response. But it's really, I want to make sure that people are comfortable at least starting the conversations. Yes, Dr. Thomas.
Just some immediate thoughts that I had may on the surface sound overly simplistic, but I often say to my clients and patients that mistakes are wonderful opportunities for learning and growth. And I think that is an integral part or statement to keep in mind as it pertains to race. So if we can embrace that mistakes are wonderful opportunities for learning and growth, then we go into it knowing that even if I make a mistake, I'm going to walk away from this with some sort of growth, and I'm going to learn from it. And I think the statements that we can say to verbalize that is that I am open. I'm open to learning. Help me learn. Help me understand. Help me learn and grow from this mistake that I may make, that I have made.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yes, Anita.
I would just kind of go with what Dr. Thomas was saying and just kind of also bring it a little bit of like the empathy that needs to go behind it as well. Have an open mind for mistakes, but also empathize that, our differences go further than the color of our skin. It goes to our experiences. And so we don't always understand where people's sensitivities are stemming from. And so listening, but not being quick to judge or putting your own, interpretations to things. And just, I think, being open to hearing people for their grievances, for their sensitivities and what they have to say without being quick to, I guess, make it a conflict, but more just like an opportunity for discussion and just to learn more about each other. Like at our restaurants, we dedicated a 1-800 number to people who felt uncomfortable about issues of race and, social oppression, so that they had a kind of like a private phone number that they could call so that, they felt heard, because not everyone does feel comfortable talking about it in person.
Wonderful, thank you. And Dr. Booker.
And I was just going to add too, I think you have to start by doing your own research again. So educate yourself. We have the internet, and it provides a great wealth of resources as well as libraries and books that we can actually read and engage in this type of conversation. It is going to be difficult. It's going to be hard to manage. But again, I think finding those support groups and areas in which you can express your views openly and honestly, I think is really going to help us to heal some of the issues as it relates to racism and these difficult conversations, but also know on the other end of that, they have to be courageous. So you have to have courage when going through and having these conversations. I say begin with your own bias. We are all biased. We all make mistakes. If you haven't had the opportunity, you can actually take the Harvard implicit bias test, and you can look at some of your biases. So identify some of those blind spots that you may have as it relates to race, sex, identity, religion. So again, 15 minutes, and that will help you to actually be aware on that surface level of some of the issues that you may be having. One thing that we do to start these courageous conversations, a book club like we're talking about now. So you want to talk about race. So have a book, have something that you can actually go through, read it together, discuss it openly and honestly, bring in a trainer or someone that is an expert in the field to have the conversation, exactly what we're doing now. Because the author, even on page 45, and I'm going to look away for a second, she talks about, so you're going to make a mistake, like you said, and she gives you like 9 types of, talking points or ideas, state your intentions openly, remember that you're not the top priority in this conversation, and don't let your emotions override it. Do your research. don't make anti-racist, remarks. And she goes on to kind of give you this guideline of how you should have these conversations. And they are going to be messy. They're going to be difficult, but no, on the other end, there's going to be healing and there's going to be resolution. And it is going to take time. It can't just be a one conversation and done. There's going to be multiple conversations, and you need to have a diverse group of individuals at the table when you do engage in the conversation, so you can get different lived experiences and different perspectives.
Wonderful. Thank you. I just want to share before I go back to you, Kina. Amy Coon sent me a chat box here, and Andy Stanley, she's quoting Andy Stanley here that says, "We trust people who make mistakes, not people who make excuses." So I think that's a good point to wrap that up. So thank you all. Thank you, Amy and Kina. I'll turn it over to you for a few questions. I've got one, but I don't want to exclude you from the conversation. So,
You're fine. You are fine. This is great to have these conversations. I just would like to when I was talking about the book and talking about the sensitivity of having these type of conversations. If we approach everything with preconceived notions, then we walk away with no real knowledge of anything. And so I think that it's important that we reset and be open. Because again, when we have good intentions to do something, and then it can go left, and we can leave, very frustrated. But again, it's great to have conversations like this. So I just want to just get into a little bit deeper into the book. The author, she talks about in chapter 1, it's about race if a person of color thinks it's about race, or it's about race if there's there's an amount of people that are disproportionately affected, and so I thought that was just, she kind of just delved right in the first chapter. Do any of you guys want to just speak on that? Oftentimes we'll be asked, well, why is this about race? Other people may not think, well, why are you making this about race? Is this really about race? Does anybody want to tackle that one?
I think in a broader sense too. I mean, we can open that up to any of the prejudices that anybody carries, those biases that we carry, and it's an emotional reaction that we have whenever it is any of those, whether it's a racial stereotype or disparaging another religion, over another, fighting them back and forth. So I think that there's a number of different opportunities where we can look at any of us with those biases, and what we're bringing to that table. And so if somebody says, that is a discrimination, or that is offensive, or, that is racist, I think if somebody calls that, we have to step back and do a little self-reflection. Mm-hmm. Does that sound somewhere in there? Any other thoughts, Dr. Booker?
It does fall somewhere into place. And I think the first part, and I think Abram Kendi talks a little bit about this in his anti-racist work, you have to first acknowledge that these things do exist. And I think you have to understand that systemic racism and institutionalized racism is real. It is something that has been documented. There's data to support it. And that you also have to recognize that this is woven into the fabric of even America, as we stated as we began this conversation. And the author, even on page 26, gives definitions, 2 different types of definitions for racism. And she states that sometimes we're even conflicted by those definitions and how we should address and how we should even approach. But again, in order to find some type of solution or some type of middle ground, that we do have to acknowledge that these things have permeated our society, everything from healthcare to education to police brutality to the wealth and disparities gap, the health concerns, even some of the issues as it relates to COVID and health disparities. And so I think we have to acknowledge that these issues, especially racism as it relates to Black people, Indigenous people of color, has greatly affected those individuals. And that race is at the root of some of these issues. Now, not all problems are related back to race, but again, you do have to do this self-reflection and even some analysis in our communities and in our country to see what issues are related even back to race. And again, these things are very prevalent in our communities. And some of the things that I've listed earlier, and again, just education, health, health issues and concerns, prison population, the prison to school pipeline she talks about in the book. And so, again, just being aware is the first step and acknowledging that these are some of the issues that we're dealing with.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes.
You know, I would just add to that when I have met people who aren't aware of the impact that race may have on someone, I tend to question their worldview. Just what types of people have you been exposed to? Do you have a passport? Because that tells me, have you ever left Georgia? Have you left the United States? So the perspective and the lens, and so then that becomes an opportunity. Can you broaden your worldview? Can you look at this from a different lens so that when you can see it from someone else's lens, even if you haven't experienced it, you will be open to seeing it. And we talked about, that's when growth can happen.
Wonderful. Yes, Anita.
And I would just say, I mean, back to the original question is, why does it have to be about race? I think if you dig a little deeper, it's more about why should it not be about race? Because when someone brings that issue up, and if you, I guess, if you're questioning it, then you're kind of questioning kind of what their concerns are and what's important to them. And if you're running a company or any sort of organization and you want people to feel included, then I think the first step is to not make them feel, not to validate their feelings and to address what is important to them. And so if race is kind of what they're seeing as the issue there, then to start the conversation and not necessarily try to change it and say, this isn't about what's important to you.
Wonderful. You know, that brings the two questions together in my mind a bit. And we talked about creating an open environment, a comfortable environment to at least begin the conversation, and then hearing some of the if one of those in the conversation says that's about race, and then we start listing some of those feelings that we have, or some of those experiences, and we've all had diverse experience. Not one of us of the five of us here have shared exactly the same experiences. And so as we have those conversations, and Kina might share something, and I might feel something in my background or my experience is similar. And then, so I want to extend that to say, oh, I understand what you're saying. I've not experienced the same thing, but this kind of reminds me of a time where I felt that. Is that a comfortable way, or is that, I guess what my point is, when having those conversations, we don't want to minimize the other person's experience and what their takeaway was from it, but I want them to know that I understand and I empathize with them. And so what are some of the things that we can look at there so that it doesn't become, one up the other, and well, yeah, that's fine, but I also had this. And so what are some of the things that we can do in having those conversations where we can open up that empathy and those mutual feelings and create that understanding that we want to work through this without making it a competitive piece? Yes, Anita.
I mean, I don't know that I'm a professional like Dr. Thomas on psychology, but when I've had those conversations, I just sit back and let the other person kind of have the stage and speak and have the majority of the space, and when the time is right, when they feel like they don't have much else to say, then I will participate and share a little bit of my experience, but not let that be the forefront of the conversation, and just to let them know that, I know where you're coming from. I empathize with you. I've shared some experiences, and I see where your perspective is coming from, but then to always kind of make it about their experience and make sure that they're heard. And yeah, like you said, not to take away from what they are bringing to the table.
Wonderful. Yeah, and I think that confirms to them that you are listening, that you did hear them. Thank you. Any other thoughts, Dr. Thomas or Dr. Booker? Yes.
There's an area of psychology called social psychology. Anita, you sound like an expert actually, because some of what you said mimics that area, but that particular area looks at how disclosure, personal disclosure, appropriate, not we know those that expose too much, but disclosure actually creates bonding and connectiveness, universality in terms of our struggles, and certainly can break down a lot of the barriers. And so, Anita, as you outlined, giving them the stage to disclose, and as appropriate, being willing to disclose yourself, your own experiences, your own life stories. CBS used to have a special called Everybody Has a Story. That is so inherently true. And if we're able to sit down and hear each other's stories, that's the first step, you know.
Beautiful, wonderful. Kina.
Well, I wanted to just kind of segue right into the cultural appropriation. It's discussed at length in the book and in great detail. And, we all are speaking from our own experiences, our own history, our own background. And the author talks about, that when we share, our experiences and we're open to listen to each other and hear each other and learn from other cultures, it can turn into something that's very, very positive. And so, a lot of times we come into something and we have our own stereotypes and from what we've heard or what we've seen on TV, maybe, and what we've observed. But just as Americans, and now that America is very diverse, and there's so many cultures here, how do you guys think that or suggest that as a community, because we've got the Zoomers that are coming up, and the millennials that are here and are going to be just running the world. How do you I found that their views are so very different a lot of times from the older generation. How do you guys adapt and adjust and just suggest that we all do as these new cultures? We don't, and what I'm really trying to say is that we don't want to, with the world in the way that it is now, we want to be careful not to invoke our opinions and instill those opinions into the younger generations, because they're very much more open, I'm finding, than the younger generations. How do we continue that as a community and as the adults leading those children? How do we make this a better place for them as we guide them and teach them?
Dr. Booker.
I think we have to make sure that we are celebrating culture and not being colorblind, right? We cannot say that, oh, I don't see color, or, I just love everybody. This is a, beautiful tapestry of, in American, it's mosaic, right? Those things are great, and I love those analogies, but I think we have to also celebrate our differences and our cultural heritage that makes us different and uplift those, because I think when you do that, that makes people feel, as we mentioned earlier, more included, right? And I think, again, even looking at different generations, because again, the more you live, the more experiences you have, right? Whether they're good, bad, or indifferent. And so I think we have to understand that we have to talk to children early. Children as early as 3, 4, and 5 can recognize the difference between facial features and even race and color distinctions, right? So again, there's never too early to start this conversation. I was on a panel earlier this week where we were talking to educators, like how do we bring this conversation in the education realm, P through 12? It can start at home. There's even books, Anti-Racist Baby, even books that talk to younger generations and younger children, all the way from, 3, 4, 5, even to young adulthood, 18 and 19. So I think this is a good place to have that conversation. I think it's also a good place to also address cultural appropriation, as we mentioned earlier. There's this saying that, everybody wants to embrace a certain culture until it's time to deal with the difficulties that culture has to endure, right? Racism and oppression, right? So we like to do things, you wear certain clothes, listen to certain music, use certain slang, even use certain words and dialect, but you don't want to deal with the oppressive nature of that culture. Jane Elliott did a lot of research there, and, some of that stuff, even the doll study helps to look at, separate but equal. And so again, we have to go back and unravel the history and talk to our children, talk to generations, and be open and talk about that narrative that we've been conditioned to believe here in America. Because again, I think this younger generation is a little bit more receptive, a little bit more inclusive of a lot of different backgrounds, not just, race, but, religious diversity. There's, LGBTQ plus students. And so again, I think the nation is primed for these conversations. I think it's very good to start them as early as possible, because again, I noticed, with students, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, you start to see this disconnect when students start to isolate themselves. There's this book, like, why are the Black kids sitting together in the cafeteria? And so you have to kind of unravel that and try to talk before you can start to see that self-segregation that we even see as early as first, second, and third grade. So again, I think it's important to cultural celebrate and not be cultural blind, and just be aware and have these conversations.
Thank you. Thank you. That reminds me, I don't know, maybe it was about 6 months ago or so, there was a video that went viral. And I think the two little boys were maybe 3 or 4 years old, and one was of color and one was white, and they saw each other on the street. They hadn't seen each other in a couple of weeks or something, and they just ran to each other and hugged, and they'd miss each other. And I think that's where we'd all love to be. But there's a long way to go for that. And so I thank you all for joining us today. Dr. Thomas, did you have anything to add on to the cultural appropriation and some of those conversations, or Anita too? Yes, Anita.
I mean, I would just say, my perspective is coming from a business owner, and just that as a business owner, you have the ability to, you have the platform to reach a lot of people, whether through your social media pages, through the type of events and nonprofits you sponsor,
Yeah.
or, we, like in our company, whenever we can, we have like a culture day, we call it Culture Day. And we'll ask for volunteers from our company to step up and just tell us a little bit about themselves that maybe we don't know. I mean, last year, I think we had a girl come up and talk about how she's a dancer, and, we had somebody else talk about, where they're from, their heritage. And so just having the platform for them to speak, and I think shows the rest of the company that you care and that you value different diversity.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you. Kina, did you have another question to follow that, or?
No, I think Dr. Thomas was going to shed some light on that one.
Oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to add, I agree with what the other panelists have mentioned. I think what I would add to that is just as part of, whether it's early on with our children or with other adults, is to embrace differences. I think whether it's gender, ethnicity, sexuality, body size, the physical features that Dr. Booker mentioned, that I think in some animalistic sense, there may be this natural tendency to avoid what's different. And then also maybe to not only teach to embrace differences, but to not generalize that this specific difference in your interactions with me as a woman of color should not be generalized to all women of color, et cetera. So embracing those differences without overly generalizing.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. A question about, we talked a bit about generalities and stereotyping and that, but the author does take a great deal of time to discuss microaggressions. And I think we all, no matter the race, no matter, we all have microaggressions committed against us, and we all unknowingly commit microaggressions from time to time. I don't think that we all do it intentionally, but I think that our lack of understanding in some cases it makes those happen. And I shared, I think it was a couple weeks ago on one of the Zooms, I shared that I realized I was on the phone talking to my mother, and we were talking about something, and I said something to her, and I stopped, and I thought, oh my God. When I thought about where the phrase came from, I started self-loathing and that. And so I think that there's so many things that we might not be aware of that we commit. And so how do we react when someone commits a microaggression against us? But how can we also raise that self-awareness within ourselves to say, oh, maybe that was stereotypical. And I think we talked about it earlier when we start, the author talks about when you see a young person of color, male, walking down the street, and you grab your purse and you hold it closer to you, or you're at a stoplight and you lock your doors as you see somebody different than you come to you. So what are some of the thoughts on microaggressions? How do we handle them? How do we respond when one is committed against us, so that we can have those conversations?
I just want to look at the definition, even for microaggressions, from the book, and I think that's on page 169. It says, Microaggressions are small daily insults and indignities against marginalized or oppressed people because of their affiliation with a marginalized or oppressed group, right? And so again, even just being aware of that conversation, being aware even what that word means. And then the next step is even looking to see, what does that sound like? Because again, sometimes people, like you said, the intent, they're not, they're not intentional trying to make these insults. And sometimes they, they definitely aren't. And that's why we look at the word micro and understand that this is a cumulative impact, that when people have to endure these statements daily, that does have some type of trauma as they will experience it. But, just some examples that, I hear sometimes in higher education, you're so articulate for X, oh, you speak English very well for etc. Oh, you're so smart. I can't believe that you're from where? What country are you originally from? And these microaggressions can be towards someone's sexuality, it can be towards someone's race, it can be towards someone's gender. And so again, it comes in this very, very, very small, these indignities that people have to endure daily. And I think that is very important because again, it is cumulative. And again, just imagine if you had to endure that for your entire life. In your classroom, at work, and even in your community, think about what does that impact look like for those people that are experiencing them. And I will say that too, a lot of times, sometimes people don't necessarily address microaggressions because of the power dynamic. Because if it's your boss making these statements, it's a professor, maybe someone that in high regard in your community, so I always say too, that it's important that we don't suffer in silence, but we do address those microaggressions as we experience them. And, again, you can start that by questioning, like, what did you really mean when you made that statement? And then once you get to that point, oh, this statement made me feel X when you stated this, right? Because again, they can be micro invalidations, they can be micro insults, and they can be microaggressions. And so you have to make sure that you understand that aggression part, that sometimes you can't be defensive when someone does call you out. And this, that does state it, because that's going to start a courageous conversation even within itself once someone addresses the person that has oppressed them or even the person that has been oppressed.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Any other thoughts?
I've had some personal experiences in grad school where we actually would use humor because within our graduate cohort, my particular graduate cohort was extremely diverse. There was a young lady from Istanbul, Turkey. There was a young lady from Osaka, Japan in the cohort. Me being from Mali. There were several Americans, African American, Caucasian male in my particular cohort. And you can imagine when you're in doctoral training, you do everything together, like for 4 or 5 years straight, you're together. So even within that core context, it happened a lot, whether it's I have braids today and someone, hey, can I touch your braids? Oh my God, how did you do that? And your hair looked different yesterday. No, you can't touch my braids. And I had a particular cohort member who was very African centered. And so I would hear comments of, she's more African than you because she's wearing the dashiki and those type of things. And so our joke would be, okay, today is going to be Black folks one-on-one. And what not to say is blah, 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 blah. Or it's going to be African one-on-one. So even turned into, we're going to have many courses throughout this semester to say, this is what you shouldn't say. And let me check you before someone else in the street checks you. So using some humor to have Black folks one-on-one,
Thank you. Anita, yes.
I would say one practice is to just pause for a second. I think a lot of times we have conversations and we just kind of speak as our minds are going, but sometimes we have to train ourselves to really think about what you're going to say before you say it. And just to question yourself, like, is what I'm about to say based on their race, based on what I see? And if it is, then maybe don't say it, And then the second thing is, if you feel like it's something that you really do want to say, then you have to think like, was there an invitation for me to speak about this? Because,
Great.
I think context is really important. If you meet someone the first time, you don't want to talk about their braids necessarily. But if you're talking about hair and this person says, I just got my hair done, then you can maybe talk about their hair, So I think using context and really just pausing and asking yourselves, why am I about to say this statement is important. I did And I did want to correct myself earlier in the Zoom call. I did say we had a 1-800 number, and I just remembered it's actually anonymous email that they can send their email.
Okay.
So I wanted to correct myself. But anyhow,
Thank
that's
you.
it.
Thank you.
Sure.
And I think that's great, because what I heard from each of you was it's trust. It's creating that trust. And I think that's where the conversations start, is you've got to have that trust. Because if I walked in and said something about, today we're, if I walked into my team and I said, today we're dealing with race relations or whatever, and we have the trust, we can talk about it. But if we don't have that trust, everybody just kind of shuts down, or it is that knee-jerk reaction that Anita alluded to. And so I appreciate that a lot. And so Anita, this might be for you, but I think anybody else can cover this too. This came in from one of our Zoom attendees. What are some suggestions you can offer as a supervisor in tackling the conversation about race in the workplace where there's minimal diversity on your team? And how do you do that while staying in line with corporate structure? Now, I understand we don't know the corporate structure. I'm going to assume it's not a fully diverse corporate structure if it's minimal diversity on the team and they've got some race concerns within the workforce. So I'm going to put that out there as that. But what are some of the ways that we can tackle it as supervisors? How can we discuss that? Yes, Anita.
So one way is to, first of all, look in your handbook and see if there's anything that you have as a policy that touches on race and diversity and that sort of thing. And I'm assuming that you have all your team members read the handbook when they first come on board. And if they haven't, that's fine, but you can always, send out a memo to everyone saying we've added this about diversity and inclusion, that sort of thing. And then depending on the size of your company, if it's possible, have one-on-ones with them and say, look, given the climate of the situation, or just this is long overdue, but just wanted to let you, have a conversation about it. And I think recognizing that, I think it's even more powerful if your company isn't diverse and you're having these conversations, because it shows that you're not doing this as a reaction, you're doing it as a preventative step. And that's, I think, says a lot about your values of your company. So, and be open to, some people aren't going to agree on it. It's not about, like, I think Dr. Thomas and Dr. Booker were saying, it's not going to be an easy conversation. I mean, expect it to be difficult, especially if there is no diversity in your company. But I think over time, I think with the right policies in place, then it'll get better.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Dr. Booker.
And just to add on to that, I think something that Anita pointed out that her company is doing was very, very impressive. It's very forward thinking with that email. Just having the opportunity for someone, they are experiencing an issue or problem, that they're able to communicate that anonymously. I think that is going to be important, because I think a lot of times these issues are going on in our communities and in our workplaces, and no one addresses it because no one knows that it has happened, right? Or if they do know it's happened, they've turned a blind eye to it because they don't know how to deal with it. So one thing that you can do, if the budget allows or if there's time, we talked about Diversity Day, Inclusive Day, but also look at a way to talk about diversity inclusion and actually training. Like, who can you bring in to do some professional one-on-one training or either group sessions so that people don't feel targeted to address some of these issues. One thing that I also look at is like an equity scorecard. Is there equity in your workplace? And then go through this scorecard and look at ways in which we can improve as a company and as a workplace, whether it's from policies and procedures all the way down to your mission and vision. And that is something that's going to take time. That can't, won't be done like a month. But again, if you want to have the conversation, it's great. But then actually dismantling some of these issues within your workplace is going to be very important, because a lot of times when you want to bring more diversity into a workplace, it's going to be important that you address some of the issues that might have prevented the diversity in the first place. And so once you do get these individuals to the table, I think it's important to listen to those that are, either there is lack of diversity, you still want to give the person where there is some diversity in the room to speak. And again, diversity is very overarching and comprehensive. It's just not race, because maybe there's some gender issues. Maybe there's some issues that deal with religious preferences, sexuality, ableism, access, accommodations. So again, just making sure that we're kind of covering the gamut of some of those issues and those conversations. It is going to be difficult. And as a supervisor, if you don't feel comfortable in that conversation, I always say there's an opportunity to bring an expert in the room to kind of deal with some of those things, and then see what you can do going forward. That's
great. Thank you. I think that as many wanting to tackle the conversation and the current status, for lack of any better classification for it, I think when we start looking at it, and if we don't have the policies, or our equity scorecard is sitting around 0, or even in the first quartile, I think it looks overwhelming, and we don't know where to start. And so I think those are some great points, Dr. Booker. Thank you. Dr. Thomas, did I see your hand wave? No. Okay. All right. I'm sorry. And we just got a thank you for the response for that question. So thank you all for that. Keena, did you have a question next?
Well, just in more the light. So this particular author, Ijeoma Oluo, her perspective is very very good, because she is biracial. She has a Nigerian father and a white mother, and she talked often about her experience just being biracial. And so she got to, I guess, feel the brunt of both sides. And so we have, as this world, it changes its aesthetics, culturally, through food, art, design, again, and it's become more culturally diverse. It's important that we, I guess, as I'm dealing with, or I'm have different business owners that I'm assisting, they'll ask, should I hire someone that looks different? And we'll get these questions about the hair and the makeup and things like that. And and you've touched on this a little bit, when someone is looking to make these type of changes in their businesses, and they just really don't know how. You talked about bringing a professional in. Where do you find, what is the first step first? How does someone find a professional? Like, where do you, if I'm looking to, I want to be more open, where do I go? Because we can have conversations like this now, and Anita, you may be able to speak to this, because you've started a great initiative at your place of business. But what's the first step that we take, or a business owner will take, into saying, hey, I'm open, I like this conversation, I've got a diverse crew. What's my first step?
Yeah.
So I always think the first step is to educate yourself first, because even if you bring a professional in and you say, look, I don't have time for this, I want somebody else to come and take care of this for me so I can focus on marketing or sales or, whatever else, I think that you're not really going to have the impact that you want, because as the leader of the company, your presence and your values are always going to trickle down. And it's going to be felt if it feels like you are just hiring someone to consult and fix this issue. So I think it always begins with yourself. I mean, you have the internet now, you have books, you have networking groups. And so there's ways to really kind of just really read about things like this, and really understand what questions you still have once you've done the research. And then from there, there's definitely companies. I have a friend named Kathy Light, who she owns a company called the Literantra Group, and that's their entire specialty is diversity and inclusion. And so once you get to that point and you really feel like you know what the issues are and the areas that still need answered, then you can hire a professional to come in and to really kind of do a deep dive into your company and say, like, where can we really start? But I think it starts with just educating yourself first.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. Dr. Thomas, did I see your hand? You were just waving at me?
Earlier. So yeah, I couldn't agree more with what you just stated, Anita, that it does start with educating yourself as well, especially if it's one thing to bring someone to talk for a day talk, but it's what you live. So walking the walk is truly I think the greatest value. And then of course you can bring in experience, trainees. And one of the sort of general recommendations I would make is to look at whether it's an author or look at professional associations within Georgia. Just a plug for psychologists, for example, Georgia Psychological Association. There's a listserv, there's a plethora of members who specialize in these types of training and discussions. And so to reach out to those organizations, if they don't give you a specific name, they could give you at least some other resources to go to. And then university professors tend to be really good resources for either grad students who are doing research in this area and would love to come in and do training. So there are a plethora of resources, but absolutely, as Anita said, start with yourself. So it's not just mere talk. It's not just a day of learning, but you're going to live it.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's a long range plan. You know, we can chop it off a little bit at a time, but it's not something. It can't be a one and done. It's just not going to happen. Thank you. We have about 15 minutes left in the hour, and I do have one more. Here's a Facebook question, and I think we tackled a little bit of it earlier. But if each one of you has 1 or 2 points just to share with this in response, what are some of the ground rules that someone should be integrating in their daily interactions and behaviors to avoid cultural or racial pitfalls? What are 1 or 2 things that we can implement daily that you know, I think the author, I hope I don't take anybody's answer, the author talks about that self-reflection and kind of jotting down why you made that reaction, why you had that reaction. But are there other pieces that we can do daily as part of that?
I think on page 209, the author does a great job of giving you some outlines or some goals. One thing that I was going to say is build a tolerance for discomfort, because again, this is going to be very uncomfortable. So again, you can't just say one and done, I had a bad experience, and then run away. Again, think before you speak. Give yourself some measure of grace, right? Because we all can make mistakes. We all can, you know, misspeak. And then if you are corrected, apologize. And then ask, how can I support you? How can I do better? So again, this is going to be, you have to look at this type of work and this type of evolution in your life or life period as something that's going to take, again, that's going to take time. And it's going to be a daily check and balances. You know, I don't want you to drive yourself crazy like, oh, did I say the wrong thing here? Did I say the wrong thing there? No, but again, just try to make sure, you know, are very reflective before you state something. I think Anita did a great job outlining some of those things. Like if you're not invited to speak on someone's hair, their clothes, or some of those things, make sure that you're not commenting, giving some unwanted comments. And again, if you educate yourself, again, on microaggressions and what does that look like, I think we can avoid some of those pitfalls. Because again, a lot of times the intentionality is not there because people are just not aware of some of those words and phrases and things that are culturally inappropriate.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Anita, one takeaway for them that they can implement daily as they maneuver through this growth process?
Oh gosh, one takeaway. That's a really hard one with diversity and inclusion. I think it's, you know, I'm a huge believer of educating yourself. So if there's a blogger or maybe a TED Talk series or something, maybe just set aside 15 minutes every day that you spend and you give dedicated time to learning about what this really means. And just really kind of let it sink in, you know, and then it only takes like 10, 15 minutes every day just to dedicate time to really, really understand it. I think it's a huge, huge topic. And I mean, we all know a lot, but there's so much more out there to learn. So just dedicate time to really make it a part of your life.
Thank you. Yeah, I think when we use the word educate, I think it, you know, certain backgrounds, certain individuals' experiences and stuff, it might turn them off, or you know, or our age might say, you know what, I'm kind of done. So I would put this out there as professional development, professional growth, personal growth. What is it that you can be better today, tomorrow than you are today? And so definitely looking at that. And I can tell you, I have spent hours, I didn't say waste, I have spent hours where I've gone down that rabbit hole because I started off on one talk or one blog or one website, and then there was another link over to something else. And it's empowering. It really is. If you look at it as that personal development, and you just, at the end of the day, you're like, wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know the history of that Confederate monument, or I didn't know what all the, and so you come out of there and you want to go tell somebody else. You want to make sure that they're aware of what the facts are and everything. So thank you. Dr. Thomas, one takeaway for an individual that wants to grow, continue to grow their process.
Well, I think possibly looking at growth as being a necessary and important part of being a human being, and that I think when we stop growing, then that's when, our time on this earth would have been done. And so to see any experiences that you encounter as, that's why I'm still here. That's my purpose for being here. And so I'm going to continue to grow, but to take care of yourself, because part of growth means you're going to encounter stress. Take care of yourself. If you create microaggressions, take care of yourself in that way after you get past the shock of it. And then beyond that, say, I'm going to grow from this.
Thank you. And I love Dr. Booker, I appreciate you saying you've got to extend yourself some grace. I think sometimes, we have that self-loathing then that we've done something wrong and oh my goodness, how am I ever going to correct it? And sleepless nights trying to figure that out. And I think that's perfect, is that we just have to extend ourselves some grace. This is a learning process for all of us. It's a maturing process for all of us. It's no matter what age we come to the table with this. I have, this kind of goes back to the first question, and the discomfort in that, but this is something, and I know Dr. Booker, you said search the internet, and I've told you, I've confessed that there are many hours that I've spent wandering around aimlessly in there to learn more. But this individual just asked, how do we, as white people, tap into the incredible resources found in our friends of color when it comes to learning without exhausting them or making them feel we think it's their responsibility to educate us? So how do we take that, sharing that perspective from that individual and manage that or scale that with, it's our own personal responsibility to learn more too. It's not, I don't expect you to educate me, but I do want to know your background. I do want to know your history. I want your feelings. So Dr. Booker, would you like to add a little bit more to your sharing of the internet? But
yes, that was such a broad term. So yes, so I think, there's, when I say books, let's go with books. So you want to talk about race. So for me, when I read a book, I'm putting sticky notes. This is my thing, right? Because I teach a lot on these things, but again, take notes. You're gonna take it back to the school, right? So you take notes. How to be an anti-racist, multiculturalism on campus. There's a lot of different books. So if you go on, I don't want to give anybody plugs, but I guess Amazon or, just Google search, books about diversity and inclusion. And a lot of these books are out there at your local bookstore. And again, start with at least taking the time to read a book. Anita mentioned TED Talks. There are a lot of different TED Talks and TED Talks about diversity and inclusion. And again, like you say, you can earmark them. You don't have to listen to them all at once. But then again, like she mentioned, take that 15 minutes, take that 20 minutes, take that time to then, because what I'm wanting you to do is have a frame of reference, right? So you're not just going and asking, like a variety of different questions, but you have more of a focused or intentional type of conversation. So as you're reading these books, as you're watching these podcasts, or you're listening to podcasts, there's a list of those that you can listen to, like 1619 Project, Conscious Kid, the list goes on and on and on. But again, looking at some of those resources, you're taking notes and you're writing down questions. So when you do come back to the table and you're talking to your friends of color, you can say, hey, I was watching this podcast, and they may have not even seen it themselves, but tell me about your experience as it relates to X. So now we can have a conversation. You feel like you have some kind of experience from reading the book or reading the, whatever. So now tell me, how can I support you? What can we do now to mitigate some of this? How can I be an ally for you? How can I be an advocate for you to help move us forward? Because now you have a frame of reference and a context. So I will say podcasts are a very good place to start. You do have the TED Talks. You do have a lot of YouTube videos on microaggressions, on diversity. What does inclusion look like? Uncomfortable conversations with a Black man. So again, those list goes on and on. Netflix, if you're into movies, I send my students to Netflix sometimes. So there's a series or genre of movies that Netflix has designated as that talk about race and things of that nature. The Hate You Give, 13, those things, Just Mercy. So again, there's opportunities if you want to go to museums. There's a lot of different museums that you can actually go to and visit. So again, when I say the internet, it was all encompassing of all of these things.
Thank you. Sometimes we take everything too literal.
Yeah.
Dr. Thomas.
I would add to that, just in terms of practical day-to-day things you can do. If I were to borrow a term from financial planners, is to diversify your social group, your social circle. So whether it's what church do you go to, is your church diverse? What restaurants do you visit? What are your friend groups like? So to have as much diversity in your day-to-day walk as you would in the things that you're feeding yourself by way of media and reading, etc.
Great. Anita.
Yeah, and I would say that you'd be surprised at how much, if this person or these people are your friends, how much they would actually enjoy talking about their race and their experiences. And not to come from a point where you feel like you're a burden or that you are making them feel uncomfortable, but if you're friends, then I think if anything they would appreciate that you are asking, and not to let that stop you. I think that people of color, people of diversity enjoy talking about it because it's not always given the space to talk about. So
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Kina, would you like to wrap us up and share anything, any last thoughts?
Well, I don't know if we have any other questions, Joe. I know we're running against time, but I just wanted to just say thank you all for joining this panel and for being a part of this conversation. It's truly, truly, truly important, especially in this climate that we are in. And, through some unfortunate events, there are some positive things that are happening. And that's truly, truly important. I just listened to you, Anita. I had some dear friends of mine who are white call me and say, I'm hearing that if I am silent, I'm not helping, and I want to call you, and I just want to have a conversation with you. And that is something that, it meant the world to me. That first, I had colleagues that trusted in me to, enough to call and just say that and say, I'm hearing that if I'm silent, then that is just, I'm not supposed to do that. I love and respect you, and I want us to have this conversation. And so it's happening. And it's great. This community dialogue, this is the second set, it's needed. And I'm glad and grateful to you all on the panel today to shed light. And this is something we need for our county, something we need for our country. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Kina, that was beautiful. Thank you. Ladies, I wish that we had more time scheduled because this really has been a great conversation. And I cannot thank you enough for your perspective and your experiences and just your intelligence. It's wonderful. And I hope you don't mind that as we continue these discussions and dialogues within the community, I might be reaching out to you from time to time to re-engage you in some of those conversations. So again, I want to thank you all. It's been a wonderful, I'm going to stop my day right now because it can't get any better than this. So thank you all very, very much. And I hope you all do well. And if there's anything that I can do to help, please let me know as well. All right. Thank you to all of our Zoom viewers and our Facebook Live viewers. Thank you. Share these videos. These will be out there. They'll be on Facebook, but we'll have that out on our website soon as well and on our YouTube channel. And if there is any feedback, please let me know. Shoot me an email at the chamber here. So thank you. Have a great day. And I am so proud and so impressed by all of you. Thank you very much. Thank you.